So I wrote
Welcome.
to Eric, and I hope he can join us.
Well, I think it's time to start now that we have stopped playing the music. So, first of all,
Eric will
welcome.
join at some stage, absolutely. When Eric comes, he will join. Because we have
Eric is coming. Eric is coming.
Yes, hello. Wait, I can't hear you.
Bonjour, Eric.
Bonjour Pierluigi.
Bonjour.
Tout va bien.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, Eric.
Bonjour.
Salut.
Hello, everybody. So I think we can start now. We are all online. So welcome everybody to this UN International Day of Conscience. The International Day of Conscience is a global day of awareness celebrated on the 5th of April, commemorating the importance of the human conscience. It was established by the UN General Assembly on the 25th of July, 2019, with the adoption of UN Resolution 73/329. The first International Day of Conscience was celebrated on the 5th of April last year. The first initiative of establishing such a day goes back to the 5th of February 2019, when the Federation of World Peace and Love, FOPAL, launched a global endorsement campaign for the declaration of International Day of Conscience at the United Nations in New York. To date, the declaration has been translated into 41 languages and endorsed by people in 185 nations. On the 25th of July 2019, during the 73rd session, the UN General Assembly adopted a draft resolution submitted by the Kingdom of Bahrain and entitled Promoting the Culture of Peace with Love and Conscience, declaring that day, the 5th of April, the International Day of Conscience. That day serves to remind people to engage in self-reflection, to improve themselves and their communities, stimulating a crucial turning point for transforming the world. Conscience empowers people to tolerate, forgive, and love one another, and thus it shortens the distance between people and between nations. The global leaders are aware that conscience is an influential entity that obliges people to condemn evil practices like colonization, racial discrimination, social stratification, gender discrimination, religious discrimination, social injustice, human trafficking, organ smuggling, and war crimes against marginalized communities. This is the era of a global world, and human migration has become much easier. Therefore, if one part of the world is left underdeveloped and unchecked, the evils of this part, poverty, illiteracy, radicalism, extremism, etc., can migrate to developed regions where they can create problems for peaceful communities. Hence, it is our global obligation to help every country to develop and achieve peace, because only then the anarchy prevailing in the world can be minimized. Conscience refers to a person's inner self, that is an abstract virtual entity, but it plays an important role in the actions of a person. A human being cannot ignore the mystic side of this person, of his personality, that usually becomes the chief motivator behind every action a person performs. Psychologists also confess that human beings are highly influenced by thoughts and feelings. These thoughts are governed by conscience, and history proves that the nations who regarded conscience were just, and those who disregarded it became cruel. Morality, ethics, and virtue are guided by conscience, and conscience stops people and nations from exploiting others. When conscience becomes inactive, people become materialistic, cruel, senseless, and scoundrel. Eventually, jungle law starts prevailing in society. The 5th of April is not a public holiday, but the International Conscience Day is celebrated by many governments, including the Czech Republic, the Kingdom of Bahrain, Australia, Canada, Jamaica, New Zealand. Moreover, many non-governmental organizations like the UNHRC and the UNAOC, as well as human rights NGOs. Public seminars are held in universities, colleges, schools, where the purpose of the day is discussed. Electronic media broadcast programs in favor of this day, and analysts write columns in newspapers. The task of the United Nations to save future generations from the scourge of war requires transformation towards a culture of peace, which consists of values, attitudes, and behaviors that reflect and inspire social interaction and sharing based on the principles of freedom, justice, and democracy, all human rights, tolerance, solidarity. Conscious of the needs for the creation of conditions of stability and well-being and peaceful and friendly relations based on respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction as to race, sex, language, religion, the General Assembly declared the 5th of April the International Day of Conscience. The General Assembly invited all the member states, organizations of the UN system, and other international and regional organizations, as well as private sector and civil society, including non-governmental organizations and individuals, to build a culture of peace with love and conscience in accordance with the culture and other appropriate circumstances or customs of their local, national, and regional communities, including through quality education and public awareness raising activities, thereby fostering sustainable development. The International Day of Conscience serves to remind people to engage in self-reflection, to improve themselves and their communities. It is a good opportunity for Taiji Men to recall once more that for 25 years, the tax administration in Taiwan has been abusing its power to unfairly persecute them and to disregard their right to behave according to their conscience. It is also a good opportunity to show you in a video how the freedom of expression and the right to protest in Taiwan for the use of one's conscience by Taiji Men disease continues to be under threat in the country. So now we will share this video with all the viewers, and I wish you a very productive sharing of these testimonies. Thank you.
欢迎收看《您应该知道的真相》。您或许在全台湾的大街小巷看过这些身影，他们是由20几个团体组成的法税改革联盟，常年关心台湾的法税议题。2020年9月19日，一群法税改革联盟的志工，一如往常的站在竹北地区的路旁，安静表达诉求，却突然遭到警方的大肆盘查。其中一名年约60岁的黄姓志工妈妈，因为举了画面上的这张字牌，而遭到了警方逮捕。究竟举这张牌是犯了什么罪呢？为您揭开您应该知道的真相。
你们违反是集会游行吗？
不用放这样啊！谁录我就判交谁。
我国宪法第14条明确保障人民享有和平集会之权利，而且根据《警察职权行使法》第6条的规定，必须在一定的条件下才能盘查人民。然而，警方在9月19日当天，竟然出动大批警力，无端大肆盘查和平举牌的志工，甚至不准志工录影自保。当时谁也没有料到，一场早有预谋的逮捕行动已经悄然展开。
这么多警察来呢，到底是为什么？我们只是在这边，我们全省有超过100多个到200个点正在进行接宣，但是为什么现在又针对我们，让我们害怕？对不对？为什么？我们全部都站在别的地方，也没有人跟我穿一样的衣服。但我会害怕。请问我侵害你的权益？我们真的害怕啊！请问我侵害了你什么权益？但我们也没有在这边，请问我们违法了吗？我们没有这里，真的吗？对啊，你们这么多人集结在一起。是意图要做什么呢？担心害怕你们聚众斗殴，我们没有聚众斗殴，那就好、啊。那就有违法的时候再告诉我们，或者说可以举牌。我们看到你们举牌，我们会问到底我们是哪里违法了，好不好？这样子。我们想要问一下，
要盘查身份，
他要盘查他的身份。直播现在在直播，现在在直播，现在在直播。
你现在影响到我们的执勤了。我
们没有影响啊，
谁录我就盘查谁。
当天警察几乎盘查了所有在场的志工，
要么你就出现。
当大规模盘查结束后，志工们陆续离开。没想到半小时之后，警方再度折回现场。以现行犯名义直接逮捕当时已无举牌，只是单纯站在路边等待子女接他回家的黄姓志工妈妈。
就是有告诉人啊，有告诉人对。你现在你是代表人就对了。
告什么名义？
什么东西？
我跟你讲吗？你是按钮人吗？
来，你，我们现在在处理案件，好不好？来，你手机收起来，不要拍。告发什么？什么东西？这是他的权利啊，这是他的权利。我等一下跟你做笔录，跟你罪名告知，好不好？等一下我逮捕你时候会跟你罪名告知，你不用担心。不要，好不好？配合就好了，先配合来。
警察在没有搜索令的情况下，未经当事人同意，便径自翻找放在地上不属于黄姓志工妈妈的提袋。
要不来？是不是这一张是你拿的？是不是？是不是？
最后， 警察在翻找字牌后，强行将一张字牌塞到黄姓志工妈妈手中，并未告知任何罪名，以现行犯名义将她逮捕至6家派出所。警察的逮捕行为完全不符合刑事诉讼法第89条第1项，执行拘提或逮捕，应当场告知被告或犯罪嫌疑人拘提或逮捕之原因，以及第95条第1项所列事项的规定，并且如果是现行犯，警察为何第一时间没有逮捕？为何去而复返，才指称手上已无任何举牌的黄姓志工妈妈是现行犯？更令人不解的是，黄姓志工妈妈最后竟然在被告罪名一变再变的情况下，遭到警方漏夜侦讯。
明天的检察官他在用传票传他就好了，根本不是重大案件，没有必要漏夜讯问，
并且凌晨移送地检署复讯。
可以用函送，为什么非得要移送？
刚刚我在里面，
中华民国
他们说没有签名也没关系，
9月
就把我妈妈带
走。为什么把人带走
？60几岁的妈妈这样子啊！
你要给他签名。
一切就像套好招似的，新竹地检署检察官竟在深夜受理案件，并对黄姓志工妈妈裁定限制住居，直到凌晨1点左右才将她释放。黄姓志工妈妈历经了将近7个小时扣押讯问，身体极度不适，在紧急送医后，医师诊断为急性压力症候群。
全世界、全台湾从来没有因为一个举牌，因为所谓的妨碍名誉罪的问题310条，然后你就可以滥用警察权力。你这样警察国家，你怎么可以这样搞呢？
我从来没有听过，因为诽谤罪用现行犯逮捕的，还送到哪里？还送到地检署啊，还夜间侦讯的，这个程序的瑕疵啊，违法的程度已经是到了足还不及备载的程度了。
完全是践踏所有走在这20年来台湾法律人所谓的民主前辈所有的付出，就因为昨天的一个，全部都毁了。
我国宪法第11条规定，人民有言论自由。国际2公约中的公政公约第19条也规定，人人有权在不受干涉下持有意见及主张。每个人都有权利自由发表主张和意见。但是在919竹北事件中，黄姓志工妈妈却仅仅因为拿了一个举牌，就遭到了妨害名誉、恐吓、违反个资等罪名的指控。整起事件令人匪夷所思，疑点重重。
所长，那我们想请你解释一下，这里有哪一个字有达到恐吓的罪行？
这个陈述、这个质疑都是可受公平的质疑啊。这一看初步判断，不用说检察官了，就算警察他看也知道这种牌子怎么会有妨害名誉，但是他居然是一个发动的事由，正常的检察官也不应该认为这个还需要后面再传唤，直接就下不起诉了。
王女涉案的部分，认为应该
9月20日事发第2天，竹北分局分局长谢伯贤大动作召开记者会，并发布新闻稿，企图透过媒体与舆论将黄姓志工妈妈抹黑成暴民，显然违反警察行政中立的原则，严重破坏警察公正形象。
如果告诉人要告诉的话，不是用一通电话打给警方说我今天要对某某人提告，警方就马上要把被告带走哦，这个做法确实是很奇怪哈。那这部分我们是认为说，警方可能显然是受到某部分的压力了哈。
我不晓得他到底犯什么，我举个牌子我叫犯罪，然后你们用里面的内容，因为有一个叫李桂芬的名字，所以他侵害到人权，侵害到隐私。我不晓得这是怎么样子的认定。
随后9月21日，行政执行署企图合理化警方违法逮捕行为，发布新闻稿指出，志工在执行人员上班经过大门口时夹道怒视、谩骂，甚至拍打车窗，包围公务车，妨碍进出，致使太极门案主任执行官李桂芬心生恐惧。但事实真是如此吗？现场的监视器画面还原了事件真相。 这支影片的拍摄地点是在行政执行署新竹分署的机械停车场门前。当时李桂芬的车子是在等待停车场的铁门开启，并非遭到法税改革联盟志工阻挡。而且依据影片之画面，志工根本没有拍打车窗等强制行为。
那9月9号他就去这个分署的大楼停车场，那当这个执行官要进这个大楼的时候，他就拍打他的车辆。那个影片我实在看不清楚到底有没有拍打。我没有，我刚刚那个围了7个人，我是没有看到拍打车辆，但是法务部执行署的这个新闻稿，它是有提到的。
事实上，行政执行署新竹分署位于新竹市，并非新竹县警察局管辖范围。而这件事情与9月19日竹北黄姓志工妈妈遭非法逮捕事件，时间上根本没有密接性。新竹县警察局长吴敬田在议会陈述此事之目的为何？是否企图丑化法税改革联盟志工形象，而将新竹县警察违法的处理行为合法化？
仅凭行政执行署的片面说辞，警方并未详加调查就展开了逮捕行动。难道919竹北事件是警方依照行政执行署的指示办案吗？若是如此，不禁令人好奇，为何行政执行署要在背后指使这起事件呢？或许从志工们的举牌能找到答案。
奖金制度并没有随着我们白色恐怖威权时期的结束而消失在我们历史当中。各位，这个制度现在还在啊，在哪里？在国税局啊，在法务部的行政执行署啊。
台湾的法税制度与戒严时期乱象丛生的匪谍整肃条例如出一辙。检举人有检举奖金，税捐机关有税务奖励金，行政执行署也有执行绩效奖励金，形成一条上下游奖励金产业链。
行政执行署也要领奖金，税务奖金。像这些不合理，都是造成政府官员滥权的诱因。
单单109年，台湾新增强制执行的案件就达1431万件，从民国90年到109年暴增7.57倍。全台湾平均每2人就有1人会遇到欠税欠费的问题。台湾人有这么爱欠税欠费吗？而这些待执行案件里面又有多少是因为奖金制度而被冤枉执行的？已经延宕25年，因侯宽仁滥权起诉移送所衍生的太极门税案，在民国96年7月13日，最高法院已经判决确定，太极门无罪无税，认定净施礼为赠与，属免税所得。代办练功服等并非盈利贩售，没有课税问题。国税局在108年已将80、82到85等5个年度与净施礼相关的课税处分全部更正为零。台北高等行政法院也在109年5月发文给中区国税局及行政执行署新竹分署，明文指出，于民国95年度判决的太极门81年综所税案，因出现新事证，请中区国税局依照80、82到84年度综所税更正为零的同一标准处理，并且依税捐稽征法第40条撤回执行。其实早在99年6月17日立法院公听会，财政部当时不但承诺2个月内解决太极门税案，而且也同意撤回81年度综所税的强制执行。中区国税局也发函给新竹分署，要求停止执行。然而，行政执行署仍然在民国109年拍卖太极门资产，并在第2次流标后，就阿拔的将太极门位于苗栗山区的道场预定地收归国有。
太极门81年的税案遭到行政执行署强制执行，拍卖的程序虽然已经终结，但这个被强制执行的主体是一张合法的税单吗？一位国税局的检任稽核在退休后出面揭露事实的真相。
就我50年来所受的教育及查税经验，太极门的案子到现在已经明确的说，他是弟子对师父的赠与，没有扣师父所得税的道理， 只有课赠与人的赠与税问题。结果呢，他把这个免税所得又丢进去，变为课税所得，那个显然就是违反租会法律主义。刑事早就判决说无罪无税无违法税捐稽征法，那为什么他5年是用撤回更正为零，还有1年居然还在说执行？这个就是违反了刑法129条的违法征收罪。
我们还有一个行政执行法第9条第3项，只要行政执行的单位他认为这个行政执行的命令有法律上的疑义，他都可以停止执行。
明明你们依据你们自己的职权就可以停止执行，就不会有那么多争议，你为什么不停？
我们行政执行处的这些官员都是司法官出身的，他凭着他的法律的常识，他就也可以看出来这个81年度判决跟其他年度判决的不同。在这种情况之下，他还要悍然执意的来执行这个拍卖的程序，这叫做明知故犯，知法犯法。
早在同年3月，行政执行署新竹分署就出现一份公文，表示要与士林分署各分1半绩效。9月19日，志工们举着一张质疑李桂芬在太极门案中分了多少奖金的牌子，难道是踩到行政执行署奖金制度不可逾越的红线，才驱使执行署在幕后指使检警，逮捕无辜的黄姓志工妈妈？
我们看到，当天在竹北各地、新竹各地，甚至全台湾各个地方，都有人举着那个牌子。为什么你挑黄妈妈？为什么？你的目的就是要杀鸡儆猴。在新竹地检门口，你不断的用话语去激怒陈志宏老师，不断的用任何的话语去激怒现场的群众，试图要让群众制造更大的纷争。想要用聚众滋事的名义，想要逮捕陈志宏教授，去企图瓦解法税改革联盟，这就是你们标准的迫害流程：抹黑、杀鸡儆猴、抓头、解散组织。24年了，这样的手法从来就没有变过。
竹北事件就像是24年前太极门案件的翻版，迫害的手法如出一辙。
24年前，侯宽仁用假消息喂养媒体，污蔑抹黑太极门，联合国税局制造假税单。24年后，侯宽仁的同期同学林庆忠组长带领着行政执行署，在媒体不断的再次释放假消息，再次的抹黑太极门。
明知是冤错假案，行政执行署仍然强行拍卖，就像明知道这个人是冤枉的，却硬要执行死刑，这绝非民主法治国家应有的作为。太极门税务冤案25年无法平反，919竹北事件，黄妈妈也无辜受害，这都已经引起了国际的关注，伤害台湾人权的形象。我们不容许真相遭到扭曲，更不能漠视少数的违法官员轻易摧毁台湾几十年来好不容易累积的人权和民主成果。相关单位应该尽速还给人民真相与正义，不能再逃避责任了。下期节目中还有更多的真相，敬请期待。我们再会。
Yeah, thank you very much. And as you could see, the Taijimendisi go on facing really hard times when they want to enjoy their freedom of expression and when they want to protest in the name of their conscience. I will now give the floor to the first speaker who will share with us his personal thoughts about the situation of Taiji with regard to the conflict with the tax administration. The first speaker is Mr. Pierluigi Zoccatelli, professor of sociology of religion at the Pontifical Salesian University in Torino, so in Italy. Professor Zoccatelli, the floor is yours.
Many thanks for having kindly invited me to this webinar organized by the Center for Studies of New Religion and the Human Rights Without Frontier, both represented here by their respective director, Professor Massimo Introvini and Dr. Willy Fautré. If I can summarize in a few words the topic of my brief speech, I would give it a title as Taxes and Religious Minorities in Italy and Taiwan, Comparison. Reading the article scholars from different countries have published about the Taiji case evidences both similarities and differences with the situation in Italy. It seems to me that the Taiji case has three main features. First, a repression in 1996 of spiritual movements labeled as cults, largely dictated by political reasons. In the case of Taiji, a crucial role was played by a prosecutor who decided to make the case as spectacular as possible and involved the media from the beginning. Although he had announced that he had uncovered stories and serious crimes, in the end, he lost all his criminal cases against Taiji. This sounds familiar to a scholar observing the case from Italy. Although the situation is slightly quieter now, we in Italy had a long season where prosecutors turned justice into a show for the benefit of the media. Some of these prosecutors eventually became politicians, members of the parliament, founder of political parties, governor of states, mayor of largest cities. In some cases, prosecutors targeted the new religions and spiritual movements and minority religion. Just as in the case of Taiji, they started with well-publicized police raids and tried to get as much as media attention as possible. Although in a minority of cases real crimes were uncovered, most of these actions ended up with the defendants being found not guilty. The second main feature of Taiji case is that once the defendants were found not guilty in their criminal trials, the National Tax Bureau continued to act against them for an alleged tax evasion. The whole story evidenced that spiritual minorities may be mistreated and discriminated in Taiwan when it comes to taxes. This may still occasionally happen in Italy, but we mostly connect this to the fascist era. The Catholic Church has settled its financial problems with the state through a concordate signed in 1929, but there were no similar provision for other religions. The Democrat Constitution of 1947 opened the road for minority religions who would enter into an agreement called Intesa with the state to be directly supported by the taxpayers. For complicated reasons, this system could only come into force after a new concordate was signed with the Catholic Church in 1984. 12 intesa followed with a variety of religious minorities, including, among others, the Italian Buddhist Union, Soka Gakkai Buddhists, and the Italian Hindu Union. We have a system called 8 per 1000, under which taxpayers are requested to indicate to which religion they ask the state to give 0.8% of their taxes. They can also select the state itself, but if they do not select any religion, nor the state, 0.8% of their taxes will not come back to them, as it happens in similar German system, or be appropriated by the state. It will be divided among the participating religions and the state in proportion of the choices made by those who did make a choice. To give you a simple example, if out of 200 Italians, 50 indicate that they want to give their 0.8% to go to the Catholic Church, 50 to the Baptists, and 100 do not make a choice, half of the 0.8% of the taxes of the 100 citizens who did not make a choice will go to the Catholics and half to the Baptists. Gifts to these religions who do not have an intesa are also not taxable, provided the group receiving these gifts is recognized as religious or spiritual. But Italian courts have adopted a broad definition of religion, which is not based on the Christian model only. For instance, the Church of Scientology has been recognized as a religion in 1997 by a decision of the Supreme Court of Cassation. So in Italy, the gifts given by the Taiji Men disciples will not be considered as taxable, and any attempt to discriminate spiritual groups through taxes will have a bad flavor as something reminiscent of the fascist era and a time when freedom of religion of belief was not fully guaranteed in Italy. A third and a final feature of the Taiji Men case is gross abuse by tax bureaucrats and the difficulty of effectively correct these abuses. We do have similar problems in Italy, and our own tax bureaucrats are often criticized. However, we have a possibility that does not exist in Taiwan. Cases of gross tax injustice may be submitted to the European Court of Human Rights, which indeed ruled repeatedly against Italy in tax cases. I understand that the possibility of an appeal to a supranational court does not exist in Taiwan. This is unfortunate because the European Court of Human Rights did intervene also in cases when religious or spiritual movements, such as the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mandarom in France, were discriminated through tax abuses. At any rate, the Taiji Men case evidences, in my point of view, serious human rights problems, and I can only hope Taiwan's democratic institution will find a solution soon. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Zoccatelli. It's always enriching to know the experience of other religious groups in other countries, and it's a fact that Taiji Men in Taiwan does not have the remedies that are available in European countries, unfortunately. I would like now to give the floor to the next speaker, Mr. Eric Roux, the chairperson of the European Interreligious Forum for Religious Freedom. Eric Roux, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Willie. Well, I'm very young on the pictures. That's fine. Okay, I would start my intervention by emphasizing the fact that the Taijimen case is not a technical case based on tax regulations. While understanding technically why Taijimen as a spiritual movement is not guilty of tax evasion may be needed, limiting oneself to this analysis would lead to a wrong picture of the case. Indeed, it's a case of freedom of conscience and a case of freedom of religion or belief. Tax regulations have often been used by authorities all over the world in order to crack down on religious or spiritual minorities. And usually it's done so when all other weapons failed. And per my experience, such cases, when they arise in what we call a democratic country, involve several factors. And I think the first factor is fanatic and obsessed people. In the Taijimen case, a few bureaucrats appeared as the origin of all attacks against Taijimen. Whether they acted on command or not is beyond my knowledge. But what we can see is that they have had no consideration for truth. And whatever we would like to think, they were not just wrong based on ignorance or false data. It's obvious that they acted in bad faith and they pursued a destructive objective, a destructive purpose. And this purpose was, of course, the destruction of Taijimen. What their exact motives are for this specific case is also beyond my knowledge, but it's my experience that it is often hidden motives based partially on some vested interest or political interest and partially on a personal fear of anything that would give people power to identify dishonesty. And that's an important point. These fanatics are afraid by truth and they are afraid by honesty because it puts them at risk, at least in their mind. And they also are very afraid of what we have seen it, but they are afraid of what they could think be the superpowers of the members they go after. And I tell you a story. I remember a prosecutor in France, in the city of Lyon in the 90s, which during a trial involving Scientologists, warned the judges to not look the Scientologists in the eyes during the trial, because the judges then could be hypnotized. And that could be compared to the statement that founder Hong of the Taijimen was a champion to raise goblins. It looks that these people are far more akin to believe in superpowers than the spiritual seekers themselves. And countries like France has its own fanatics against what they call cults, in fact, mainly religious minorities. They have a man called, for example, George Fenech. He's a former judge of investigation and a former MP who built his career on the fight against religious minorities. Russia has its own. They have an Orthodox fanatic named Alexander Dworkin, who was self-proclaimed an expert on cults. And Jehovah's Witnesses, Hindus, Sufi Muslims, actually all those movements that could be thought to be challenging the traditional vision of the Russian Orthodox Church are the targets of Alexander Dworkin. And this kind of people create the fear that they need to be able to continue their campaign in the public medias. They need something to happen if they don't want to disappear. And the discovery that something they are described as a cult is not one is a cruel disavowal that they cannot accept. That was the first factor. The second factor would be the fear of losing control of a sector of the population, which would be created by the growth of influence of a spiritual or religious movement. Usually, the spiritual or religious movements are targeted when they are growing and when they are attracting a large number of followers. That is true all over the world. Mainland China, and that is not a democratic country, but they started targeting Falun Gong practitioners when their number grew, such as to let the Communist Party think that they could not be controlled anymore. The truth is that spiritual freedom is a threat to those who can't live without thinking that they control others for their own vested interests. Most of the time, that's not even true. They have nothing to fear because this movement are not interested in them, nor in politics. And even if some movements engage in politics, that's a minority. And that does not matter for the one who feels to lose the control. Taiji men never engaged in politics, but for an obscure reason, some thought they were a political threat. Teachings of their founder, Mr. Ong, were popular and attracted a large number of followers. He taught values and techniques that would empower his followers and give them more freedom in living their lives. That was enough to constitute a threat in the mind of some politicians and bureaucrats. And then the two next factors would be, I would say, the failure of other judicial weapons, and then, of course, the misuse of the tax law. Usually, tax cases against spiritual of new religious movements are started after another kind of judicial attack failed to destroy the movement. It's a kind of Al Capone jurisprudence, Alphonse Capone. During the early 30s, the US government could not find a way to catch the gangster Al Capone, who was always getting away from the investigations against him. So tax office agent had the idea to go after him for tax evasion, as Al Capone was not paying any tax, and he succeeded. So now some people think that this should be applied to any movement that succeeds in overcoming a judicial trial, when they think that the movement is guilty despite what the justice system said. Unfortunately or fortunately, not everyone who succeeds in life is a gangster. And applying this to law-abiding citizens is wrong. I remember speaking to a French high-ranked member of the Internal Secret Service of France about a religious movement that had been targeted for decades in France. He explained to me that they were the ones behind most of the attacks, judicial and tax ones. And the reason he gave me, they had realized that some members of this movement had wealthy companies that were starting to contract with the Ministry of Defense to change their antiquated computer system. And for the Secret Service, this was too risky because it could mean that the movement was trying to take over the control. The reality was that the leader of the companies were just mere members of the movement and had no other interests than business. But the intelligence agency decided they had to destroy the movement by doing everything. So they triggered criminal cases, cooperating with anti-cult association, a bit like it was done in Taiwan when a fake association of the victims of Taiji men was created. And when the criminal cases failed to destroy the movement, they triggered tax inspections. And of course, the tax inspections failed too. Still in France, it is when the Jehovah's Witnesses started to win in court in terms of religious recognition, which was a big loss for their enemies, that the enemies started to attack them tax-wise. Jehovah's Witnesses finally won the case at the European Court of Human Rights, which has been very clear that using the tax law against religious movement just because you don't like them is wrong. Of course, because the purpose of those who do that is not to make people abide by tax regulation as they should do. It's to destroy a movement that for some reason they think needs to be destroyed. And it is in many aspects similar to what is done to the Taiji men. Tax issue is the last face saver to those who try to destroy them in the past. Even if something proves them wrong, they cannot abandon, as this would be a cruel disavowal. But is it a tax money motivated issue? It might be for some of them. Those of the tax office who earn bonuses based on the tax adjustment they apply to the taxpayer. But for the Taiji men, it's a freedom of belief issue. First and foremost, because members individually suffer from the persecution they have to face. And then, in addition, the attention and resources of the Taiji men are diverted from their original spiritual purpose, as they have to deal with unjustified attacks. The fact that this can happen in a country that nowadays is a model for freedom of religion or belief should tell you how it can go elsewhere. But that is also why it is important to see this case finally solved. Because if one of the best countries regarding freedom of religion or belief allows that kind of persecution to occur, it sends a message to the world. And this message is, you can do whatever you want and get away with it in terms of freedom of religion. And that is a very wrong message. And I would think that Taiwan would not want to send this message. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for this very interesting presentation and the fact that you highlighted a common denominator between all those groups, whatever the country where they are based, and their political system that are persecuted by the tax administrations, and who is behind the tax administration, what are the vested interests that are at play. I think that will be a great contribution to the understanding of the motivations of some evil forces, I would say, to name them as they are, that are opposed to freedom of religion or belief for many other reasons. So this first part of our foreign speakers is coming to an end, and I will give the floor to Marco Respinti, who will introduce a number of diseases who have to share with us their testimonies. Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which side of the globe you are based. It is my pleasure to speak after Willy Fautré's great introductory remarks and after the important speeches by Professor Pierluigi Zoccatelli and Eric Roux, who already touched the crucial points here. I will then practically repeat now briefly some of their concepts. Please take these as an emphasis added to the value of the aforementioned speakers. I think that on the UN International Day of Conscience, it is important as well as strategic to focus on one key point, as we are doing now. And that key point is religious liberty. Religious liberty is in fact the immunity from coercion on individuals and social groups by any human power, state, group, church, so that no one is to be forced to act in a manner contrary to his own beliefs, whether privately or publicly. I always understand and define religious liberty as a safe haven. The state specifically must stay out of religious business, any religious business. I like to define religious liberty as a no-flight zone. No one is allowed to fly over these basic human rights. In fact, it ranks number one among political, specifically political human rights. And it comes just after the right to life, meaning that a dead person enjoys no rights. So you need to be alive, and then immediately you enjoy the first of the political human rights, which is religious liberty. Now, religious liberty concerning the Taijimen case touches, as we know, upon taxes. Let me just remind and ask myself, what are taxes? Roughly, they are the way by which states sustain themselves and the fee paid by citizens to receive services. First of all, protection. But if we define taxes in this way, taxes are also a strong power in the hand of a state. If a state uses taxes against its own citizens, it reverses completely what taxes are meant for. Taxes are a great power in the hands of the state in comparison specifically to groups and individuals. There is no possible comparison between the power that the state has and the group has, an individual has. More than that, it's a lost, it's an infinite power in the hands of the state, especially if citizens are progressively spoiled out their factual power to resist. The case of Taiji is roughly an important example of how a state uses a tool which is crafted to benefit the citizens of the state, taxes, to persecute the first political freedom of people, religious liberty. As every group brilliantly just said, when the state is not able to target a group as such, it uses taxes to go around and crucify a group or individuals. There is a forthcoming new book, forthcoming in English, which will put it available for every audience, produced on the Taiji case, whose title is "Who Stole Their Youth?" It chronicles a quarter of a century of persecution of Taiji Disi. This means that the young and the youngest Taiji Disi know only persecution of their own group, which is unbelievable in the West, which is unbelievable all over the world. It's something that we usually tie to totalitarian country. Taiwan is not a totalitarian country. Taiwan is a democratic country. So the question is, why, in the case of Taiji and religious liberty, Taiwan, a democratic country, uses these tyrannical powers? I hope you will soon have the possibility to read this important book, which testifies what Taiji Disi has suffered for so long a time. So it is my pleasure to give the floor now to some Taiji Disi who will share with us their own experience in faith, religious liberty, and persecution. Before giving the floor directly to the first of them, we will be shown another important video illustrating the Taiji case with precision and competence to get us directly right to the point.
Worldwide Taiji Disi urged the Taiwanese government to end the persecution against Taiji and resolve the Taiji case. Taiji has long committed itself to the continuance and promotion of Chinese culture. Taiji Shifu and Dizi have self-funded their trips to over 100 nations, promoting love, conscience, and peace, facilitating cultural diplomacy, as well as carrying forward the spirit of benevolence and humanity. Their efforts have received recognition and praise from all fields at home and abroad. Since the establishment of the Taiji Qigong Academy in 1966, the nature of the relationship between Shifu and Dizi has never changed. In 1996, the Taiwanese government launched a political purge in the name of a religious crackdown, and Taiji was caught in a crossfire. As a result, a criminal case was unlawfully prosecuted against Taiji. Additionally, the National Taxation Bureau violated the law and abused its power by treating the monetary gifts in the form of red envelopes given by Taijimen Dizi to their shifu as tuition fees for a cram school. While in traditional Chinese culture, it is customary for Dizi to do so to show respect for their shifu. The Tax Bureau also falsely claimed the collective procurements of items such as uniforms, which was a voluntary mutual assistance activity among Dizi, as a for-profit business transaction. These unjustified legal and tax measures by the authorities have led to a case of gross religious persecution spanning the last 25 years, seriously violating Taijimen members' human rights, including their right to participate in cultural life and freedom of religion or belief. The Taijimen tax case involves the National Taxation Bureau's violation of due process, failure to conduct a thorough investigation according to its authority prior to issuing the tax bills, concealment of evidence favorable to Taijimen, and failure to give the parties concerned an opportunity to explain the matter, resulting in an unjust taxation and unlawful court decision. All the illegal tax bills originated from Prosecutor Hou Kuanzhen's indictment. The prosecutor fabricated a huge amount of income and falsely claimed that the money was the proceeds of fraud. But at the same time, he also claimed that the same money was the tuition and business income of a cram school, and the case was tried by a criminal court. Wouldn't it be necessary to clarify whether the money was the proceeds of fraud or tuition and operating income? If it was the proceeds of fraud, then the case should not involve the issue of tuition fees, business income, or tax evasion. Moreover, if it was the proceeds of fraud, how could it be taxable? The purpose of the criminal trial was to clarify the truth before the criminal court rendered its decision. How could the National Taxation Bureau issue the tax bills without investigating the matter thoroughly according to its authority? How could it violate due process and rob the people? How could the administrative court make a judgment on its own at that point? Furthermore, the National Taxation Bureau has consistently failed to produce any evidence to justify its claims in this case in accordance with the law. These tax sanctions were based solely on the prosecutor's indictment. In 2007, the Criminal Division of the Supreme Court confirmed that the defendants were not guilty of fraud, tax evasion, or violation of the Tax Collection Act, and ruled that the red envelopes given to the shifu were gifts and thus tax-free income under Article 4, Paragraph 17 of the Income Tax Act. It further determined that the collective procurement of items, such as uniforms, was a mutual assistance activity among Dizi rather than for-profit sales and was not a taxable event. The Ministry of Education has stated on 3 occasions that Taijimen is not a cram school. Furthermore, in 2009, the Control Yan's investigation report indicated that the Tax Bureau had 7 major violations of the law in its handling of the Taijimen tax case, including failure to conduct a thorough investigation. The National Taxation Bureau also admitted its own mistakes. In 2012, the National Taxation Bureau acknowledged that Taijimen is not a cram school. In 2018, the Supreme Administrative Court recognized Taijimen as a menpai of Qigong, martial arts, and self-cultivation. In 2019, the National Taxation Bureau corrected the tax amount to 0 in the consolidated income tax cases for the years 1991, 1993, 1994, 1995, and 1996, which share the same underlying facts with the tax case for 1992. These have proved that the basis for taxation in the tax case for 1992 was false from the very beginning. To conform to the spirit of the rule of law, the National Taxation Bureau should therefore immediately revoke the erroneous taxation bill, return the forcibly auctioned and confiscated land, which was intended to be the site for a future Taijimen Academy, clear the names of Taijimen Shifu and Dizi, and return justice to them. How can the National Taxation Bureau undermine judicial prestige, rob the people, violate their human rights, harm the country, and hurt the people? For more information, please refer to the explanation of the Taijimen case at www.act1219.org.
So we learn how serious the Taijimen case is and how staggering it is. It is now my pleasure to give the floor directly to Taijimen Dizi for their own sharing of their own experience. The first of the guests that we have is Ms. Charlotte Lee. Ms. Lee is a human rights observer at the Association of World Citizens, as well as a Taiwan lawyer.
Thank you, Marco. Distinguished panelists and friends, good afternoon and good evening. I'm a lawyer practicing commercial law in Taiwan, and I'm also a human rights observer from the Association of World Citizens Taiwan. My organization is associated with the UNDPI. As a human rights observer, we have noted many victims are suffering from abusive tax collection by the tax authority. The most noteworthy case in Taiwan is the Taijimen case. Beginning from 1996, the Taijimen case is one of the longest standing cases of taxpayers' human rights violation. However, to this day, this case, which has drawn the attention of Taiwan and international scholars, human rights, religious, and cultural group leaders, it still hasn't received effective remedy after 25 years. At today's forum, I will point out 5 aspects which are serious violations of 2 international human rights covenants, ICCPR and ICESCR. The first, the government has violated the principle of equality and non-discrimination. Since the founding of Taijimen Qigong Academy in 1966, Dr. Hong Daozi, Zhangmenren of Taijimen, were taxed only for the 6 years listed in prosecutors' indictment when Taijimen was caught in the crossfire during the religious crackdown. It is a traditional custom for a disciple to offer the monitoring gift to their shifu, to show their respect and gratitude in the martial art and religious community. In Taiwan, there is no master of the martial art, menpai, or religious group was taxed for accepting monitoring gift from disciple or follower. In the Taijimen case, the tax agency treats the red envelope from Dizi to their shifu differently for 6 years from other years without any legal basis and objective reason. And the red envelope were treated differently for Taijimen from those for other martial arts or religious group. This violates the principle of equality and non-discrimination under Article 2 and 26 of the ICCPR and Article 2 of the ICESCR. Second, the government has violated the freedom of thought, belief, and religion. According to the Article 18 of ICCPR and General Comment number 22, people's right to freedom of thought, belief, and religion should be fully protected. The committee also emphasized that people's inner thought and belief and the freedom to practice the religion of their choice are absolutely guaranteed. And the government must not restrict or infringe on these rights. Taijimen is an ancient menpai of Qigong, martial arts, and self-cultivation that carry forward Taoist philosophy. Taijimen Dizi agree with Zhangmenren's idea of purifying people's heart and decided to follow him to practice Qigong and cultivate their hearts. They follow an ancient ritual to create the Shifu-Dizi relationship. To show their gratitude to and faith in their Shifu, they voluntarily offer monetary gifts to Shifu when they were officially accepted as a 弟子. This constitutes a necessary component of the realization of an inner belief or religion, which is absolutely inviolable. The covenant requires the government to respect, protect, and implement the freedom of thought, belief, and religion. The tax agency has failed to protect. On the contrary, it has discriminated against Taijimen, so their right has been violated seriously. The third, the government has violated Taijimen members' right to cultural engagement. Taijimen carry forward Chinese culture of Qigong and martial arts. It aims to improve global citizens' physical, mental, and spiritual health. Over the past few decades, Zhang Menren has led his 弟子 to participate in thousands of cultural performances at home and abroad. Taijimen is not only an organization of traditional culture, but also a cultural group for public welfare. Offering red envelope to show respect to master is carrying forward an aspect of traditional culture. That also shows Taijimen 弟子's agreement with their Shifu's idea of promoting traditional culture, and this is their right to choose to engage in a certain cultural life. However, the tax agency treats the bond between the Shifu and his 弟子 developed in this cultural engagement as a business transaction. That has distorted the cultural custom. The tax agency once even imposed a travel ban on Zhang Menren, which violated his freedom to preach and promote culture. Taiwan's tax agency completely goes against the spirit of ICESCR, violating Taijimen Shifu and 弟子's right to cultural engagement. The cultural heritage and development is hindered because of the unjust tax collection practice. The next, the government has violated Taijimen members' right to a fair trial. In 2019, the tax agency finally corrected the tax for the red envelope to 0 for 5 years, but didn't correct the same for 1992 tax bill due to the reason that the court decision was a final judgment. However, this court decision was against the requirements of a fair trial. When the case was heard by the Taichung High Administrative Court, the judge had completed all evidence investigation preparation procedure, but then she was transferred to the Supreme Administrative Court. When Zhang Menren appealed his case, the judge handled the case again and ruled against Zhang Menren. Since the judge completed the entire substantive preparation procedure in the pretrial, she was supposed to recuse herself, but the judge didn't. According to the General Comments number 32 and Article 14 of the ICCPR, everyone has the right to a fair trial, to a fair and open trial, so qualified, independent, and unbiased court are absolute requirements. The recusal doctrine, people's right to appeal to a higher court are all essential to a fair trial. The General Comments require that a judge should not be influenced by his personal prejudice when making a judgment. He should not predetermine the judgment in the case. Therefore, the court decision for tax for 1992 violated the requirement of a fair trial, so it was an invalid decision in the first place. Finally, the government has failed to fulfill its duty to provide effective remedy. According to Article 2 of the ICCPR, the government has the obligation to ensure its people's rights should be effective remedy when their rights are violated. General Comments number 31 point out the government should take all measures, such as legislative, judicial, political, and educational measures to fulfill its illegal obligation. In this case, the criminal court already concluded the innocence of Taijimen and ruled that red envelope were gifts. But Taijimen Shifu and 弟子 still need to spend energy, money, effort to seek remedy for 25 years. And still now, the government still connive at the tax agencies overriding the power of the other department and violate the government's obligation to provide effective remedy. The Taijimen case have also revealed many systematic problems in Taiwan's legal and tax system. We have seen the major flaw in the retrial system and the mechanism of reopen a tax case. The retrial is subject to the statutory limitation of 5 years. The high threshold makes retrial difficult to be approved, and the reopen of a tax case is not feasible in practice because tax agency had made it virtually impossible to reopen. The design of the system is like shooting a wrongfully charged criminal even though all evidence pointing to innocence of that person. This is an outrage and gross violation of human rights. The government shoulders undeniable responsibility to solve the case without any further delay, and the relevant government department should fix the systematic problem to ensure a fair retrial and reopen of a case. Taiwan government has made ICCPR and ICESCR as a domestic law. Therefore, they have obligation to offer effective remedy to Taiwanese people. So we urge President Tsai Ing-wen, President of Control Yuan Chen Ju, and the National Human Rights Committee to look seriously at the truth, listen to the calling of conscience, and realize people's rights protection so that no more unjust case needs to happen again in Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee. Violation of the right to non-discrimination that you mentioned is so popular and important today. And I think that people reacting all over the world against discrimination should never forget the discriminated Taijimen case. Our second guest is Dr. Chang'an Tsai, professor in the Department of Business Administration at the Xiqian University and Taijimen Dizi. Professor, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cai Zheng, an associate professor at Xiqian University. I became a Taijimen Dizi in 1990. Taijimen has preserved the traditional wisdom of maintaining good health. We also had the guidance of Shifu and many like-minded brothers and sisters who together practice the cultivation of the heart. As a result, I have the confidence to overcome many challenges in life. However, for the past 25 years, we have exhausted all legal means only to see Taijimen continually persecuted by the unjust judiciary and tax regime. We will continue to do the right thing by defending democracy and upholding human rights. Taijimen is an ancient menpai of Qigong and martial arts. Taijimen Qigong Academy was established in 1966 according to the laws of Taiwan. Since its inception in 1966, Taijimen Qigong Academy has never had any tax issues. Why did Taijimen have tax issues from 1991 to 1996? Why has the Taijimen unjust case in 1996 not been resolved after 25 years? My conclusion is that the Taijimen case is a typical case of human rights violation in the process of Taiwan's transformation from an authoritarian regime to a democratic constitutional system. Even though we are now in 2021 with the rule of law and democracy and a lot of discussions of transitional justice, the fact is that the current system has not dealt with past issues of human rights violations by the state through its power to tax. The current remedy system is still limited to the old framework. The well-known case of Taijimen is still struggling to have justice returned. This is an obvious violation of the responsibilities of the state as per the 2 international covenants of human rights. The martial law was enacted in 1949 and Taiwan was under an authoritarian regime for 38 years until the martial law was revoked in 1987. Under the authoritarian regime, judicial power and legislative power serve the executive power. Legal delegation is a tool for the ruling regime, and the regime under the authoritarian system has full discretion, administrative discrimination. When the martial law was lifted on July 15, 1987, Taiwan started to shift to a new paradigm. When the Democratic Progressive Party took power for the second time in 2016, Taiwan started aligning with the Western standards of democratic regime. The period from 1987 to 2016 was the so-called post-authoritarian regime during which executive power still dominated with judicial power and legislative power being under its control. The Taijimen case took place in 1996 when human rights protection was not the core value of government administration and political depression was still a common practice by the state power. In December 1996, Taiwan was in the post-authoritarian regime. Back then, it was an integrated procuratorial system. That is, the prosecutor were under the supervision and command of senior and high-ranking prosecutors. This was an important means to control the judiciary power to serve political purpose. When the government launched the clampdown against particular minority groups, the administrative judiciary and tax power colluded to persecute innocent people and organizations. At that time, the government carried out a political purge against the religious organizations that supported the opponent during the presidential election. Taijimen was unfortunate to get caught in the series of raids. The Taijimen case was an illegal and false case made out of nothing from the beginning. It demonstrates the gross violation of law and injustice by the government. On July 13, 2007, the Taijimen criminal case was found not guilty and tax-free by the three-tiered criminal court system. We have to understand that the tax cases were derived from the criminal case. 5 out of 6 tax years in the dispute with tax authorities was ruled in favor of Taijimen. Only 1 year, tax year 1992, was ruled against Taijimen by the Administrative Court in May 2005. Before the criminal court finalized its rulings, the decision for the tax year 1992 regarded Taijimen as a cram school and taxed Taijimen accordingly, and a judgment was made in vain. The decision is in conflict with the criminal court's findings. From 1992 to 2020, the authoritarian system of law and taxation constructed by the administrative courts was not made to protect human rights, and the regime is without checks and balances. It harms basic human rights and hinders the advancement of society. It also highlights that in Taiwan's authoritarian system after 2005, the administrative court did not have the awareness of protecting human rights and continues to be a tool to shield administrative power. In addition, most of the administrative court judges are not familiar with the tax law and tax codes, relying mostly on the opinions of tax agents as the basis of their rulings. As such, 93% of the tax disputes are ruled against taxpayers. The lucky 7% of taxpayers who win the case against tax authorities do not see their rights as protected either. The unjust tax demands are not revoked by the administrative court. The tax bill returned to tax authorities is another legal sanction, which gives it the right to issue new tax bills. The taxpayer will then have to start another battle in administrative court. Forced to run on the never-ending treadmill, taxpayers bear the pain of suffering from abusive state power. Therefore, this so-called 10,000 years immortal tax bill forces the people to reincarnate in it, like hell on earth. In 2017, Taiwan passed the Transitional Justice and Ordinance and established remedies and compensations by the state for the human rights violation caused by the authoritarian regime. The act is above criminal law, and it effectively handles cases of government violations of human rights under various authoritarian regimes. However, it is a pity that the regulations define that the period of authoritarian regime is from August 15, 1945 to November 6, 1992. Does that mean that the Taiwanese government stopped violating human rights after 1992? Of course not. The Taijimen case is a typical case of human rights abuse by judiciary and tax power in 1996. Taiwan has made the 2 international human rights covenants in its domestic law in 2009. The 2 international covenants require effective remedies provided by the government. The Judiciary Department can use many different methods to effectively ensure that the rights stipulated by the covenants are recognized and protected in various ways, including direct application of relevant articles of the covenants, constitutions, or other relevant laws, quoting similar concepts and interpreting the laws and the perspectives of international covenants. Independent and impartial administrative agencies, such as the Human Rights Commission, can be established to investigate human rights violations swiftly, thoroughly, and effectively to ensure similar abuses will not be repeated. However, Taiwan's current remedies system does not provide effective methods after the judgment on unjust administrative sanctions has been confirmed by the Administrative Court. This has resulted in well-known and obvious unjust case violations, preventing them from seeking justice. This constitutes a gross violation of the nation's responsibility under the two international covenants. I urge President Tsai to look seriously into the many unjust cases of human rights violations caused by state violence under the post-authoritarian system after 1992. Transitional justice should not be subject to expiration. Effective legal, tax, authoritarian, transitional, and justice regulations should be formulated to surpass the existing administration and offer effective remedies and compensations. Retrial systems for tax cases must be legalized. The ultimate goal is to ensure Taiwan honors and practices rule of law, democracy, and human rights.
Thanks to Dr. Cheng Tsai for his heartfelt appeal to the Chief of State of the Taiwan State for the respect, to call for the respect of the rule of law, which is so basic and so sometimes ignored. The next speaker is Dr. Susan Wong Selfridge. She is a music educator and a Taiji man. Dr. Wong Selfridge, the floor is yours.
Professor Massimo Intravina, Mr. Fortre, Mr. Resminti, distinguished panelists, and friends around the world, good morning and good evening. I would like to extend my appreciation to the Center for Studies on New Religions for providing this open platform for discussing all things concerned regarding freedom of religions and human rights globally. At today's forum, I will be sharing my point of view on Taiji Men as a cultural spiritual cultivation institution and their unwavering 25-year journey in pursuit of redress for the violation of taxpayers' human rights at the hands of a corrupt government agency in Taiwan. Their prolonged effort are not only for themselves, but also serves to trailblaze a safe path for the people of Taiwan to live without fear from the unlawful governmental officials' abuse of power in the form of taxation for personal gain. It is especially significant to talk about the case as we are celebrating the second United Nations International Day of Conscience on April 5th and today, because no human rights can be fully protected unless people's innate conscience has been awakened. When I first joined Taiji Men Los Angeles Academy in 2005, the organization was in the process of navigating the entanglement of a very complicated criminal case that also instigated a tax case that had spent 8 years at the home base in Taiwan. In summer 2007, Taiji Men was found innocent from the criminal charges by the Taiwan Supreme Court in a ruling that effectively should have purged the tax issue as well, as the tax case was based on a fabricated criminal indictment by prosecutor Ho Kwan-ren. However, the tax authority ignored the court ruling and reissues the tax bills. For the following 16 years, the Tax Bureau ignored court order after court order, and in August 2020, directed the Administrative Enforcement Agency to illegally auction land owned by Taiji Men in defiance of a cease and desist order from the court. When the auction failed to receive bids, the agency seized the land, which was intended to be the building site for Taijimen's holistic cultivation center. These conceivably egregious behaviors all occurred within the 21st century modernized Taiwan governmental system. I couldn't help but associate the greedy and corrupt taxation bureaucrats with the classical movie trilogy, The Godfather, and how the criminal families harassed and extorted the general citizenry, often using violence to disrupt businesses to gain power and profit. The patriarch of the Corleone family, Vito's most memorable quote goes, "I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse." The scene parallels the actions of the tax officials who are incentivized by bonuses for collecting taxes. These officials often arbitrarily bill taxpayers without actually investigating the nature of their income or the existence of the alleged income. Even more so, according to some Taiwanese business owners I have encountered, some unscrupulous tax collectors will come to a business and demand tax payments regardless of the actual income tax liability. If the business refuses, the tax collectors will send an audit team and threaten to go over the entire business detail by detail. Threatened by the disruption of normal business by the tax audit, they often just pay off the officials who gets bonuses on the amount collected, regardless of the legitimacy, making the tax officials' actions indistinguishable from the Corleones. The people are essentially powerless to stop these actions. In rare cases, that someone like Taijimen's Grandmaster Dr. Hong refuses to pay the illegal tax bills and gets judicial rulings in their favor. The Taiwan National Taxation Bureau, NTB, not only ignores the rulings, but also ignores the evidence provided by the people, even lies and deceived people, and continues their unlawful actions. If the NTB can do whatever it takes to collect taxes, it will be no different from an organized criminal syndicate. The purpose of a government is to protect its people and to provide law, order, and effective remedies, at the same time providing economic opportunities and public services to ensure people's well-being and happiness. It is crucial for the governmental officials to set conscientious examples when they exercise the power that was entrusted by the people. When a public servant makes mistakes, the government should take action to hold the public servant accountable, while taking proactive remedies is of imperative importance. In Luke chapter 19, verses 1 to 10 of the Bible, the unsavory tax collector Zacchaeus said to Jesus when they met at his house, "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold." From this illuminated example, we see how a corrupt official can come to terms with his conscience and take concrete actions to amend his unlawful mistakes. During the long and treacherous journey of redressing Taijimen's case, a few concerned representatives suggested Dr. Hong to settle the case with the Taxation Bureau. After negotiating a deal, an offer that was too good to be refused, and hesitantly, Dr. Hong rejected the idea of settling immediately and expressed in a very determined tone that the whole point of never succumbing to the unjust governmental machine is to lead by example, so the members of Taijimen can learn to distinguish true from false, good from bad, and right from wrong. Rising like a phoenix from the ashes, Dr. Hong, Mrs. Hong, and many fellow Taijimen brothers and sisters have gone through tremendous pain and suffering during the pursuit for justice. Their sacrifice does not go in vain. The road to restoring justice is bumpy, and the path to legal and tax reform is even harsher. However, Taijimen is not alone in this journey, as more and more people, especially experts from the legal field and retired senior officials of taxation units, have joined them in the struggle for the human rights. Meanwhile, more and more young people realize that they should save their own country. Although young and inexperienced, they demonstrated a great deal of courage and determination. The ray of hope for a better future where all people can live with peace of mind and dignity illuminates their eyes. I encourage all of you to extend your support by using your voices to bring international awareness to the unlawful actions of the Taijimen, the Taiwan Tax Bureau, which is operating more like an organized crime syndicate than a governmental agency. That said, I would like to conclude with a quotation by Nelson Mandela. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. It's time for the Taiwan government to act from the conscience, and it's time for us world citizens to rise for human rights. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Wong Selfridge, for, as we say in Italy, putting your finger into the wound and call for the state of Taiwan to respond if any one of the Taiwan officials made any misdeed, as we are saying. This is the right question at the right moment, and it's the top, and this is the topic, and we really hope to see some developments on this key point in the near future. It's very relevant. Our next speaker is Mr. Chung Chen. He is a product manager at a technology company, and he's also a Taijimen Dizi. Mr. Chen, the floor is yours.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Chuck, and I'm honored to have this opportunity to speak today about religious rights. I'm a product manager. Rights issues. I'm confident that when the world learns to respect belief, we humans can be humble. The society can be safe, and peace and sustainability can truly happen. So I would like to share you a special and meaningful lesson that my Shifu has continuously taught me in the past 25 years. My Shifu is a Zangmenren of Taijimen, Dr. Hong Daozi. While every country is trying their best to preserve their cultural performances, my Shifu has always focused on inheriting culture and promoting physical, mental, and spiritual wellness. The Taiwanese government allocates more than 20 billion NTD to the Ministry of Culture and Ministry of Foreign Affairs annually. Take 2020 as an example. The budgets of these two ministries exceed 55.2 billion NTD. However, under the leadership of Dr. Hong of my Shifu, we never accept donations or public funds. We, Shifu and Dizi, support ourselves in visiting more than 100 countries and more than 300 cities to participate in more than 3,000 local and international cultural performances and exchanges while promoting diplomacy between nations. In the recent year, under the pandemic, we have also hosted more than about 30 virtual events, spreading the importance of conscience. This is what Shifu and us has been working on recently. So what exactly has my Shifu told me? It's a long story. In 1992, I became a Dizi. And when I was young, I used to go to the academy with my parents. When they were practicing Qigong, I played around, and the brothers and sisters would even take turns taking care of me. Since then, I have always known that Taijimen is a good place to learn happiness, positive attitude,
physical training and self-cultivation. Therefore, I was utterly confused when I heard the news that Shifu was taken away by the police. How come I never saw the fraud, goblins, and tax evasion that the news accuses? I later realized that prosecutor Hou Kuan-ren could not find any criminal evidence, so he used the media to falsely accuse Taijiman to accuse my Shifu, to make us already in the loose before the trial even began. After a few months, when my Shifu had returned, he still smiled and told us that we have to keep faith and still love this country. So after 10 years and 7 months, the third instance of the Supreme Court confirmed that my Shifu was guilt-free and tax-free. The Control Yuan, a unit in charge of supervising civil servants, said that the prosecutor Hou Kuan-ren had committed 8 violations, and the National Taxation Bureau, NTB, had 7 violations on this case. The state admitted its wrongdoing and compensated my Shifu along with his other 3 deeds for their wrong confinement in the end. All of our brothers and sisters were thrilled on hearing those news. At that moment, we thought that if the tax case of Taijiman was derived from a wrong indictment, the judicial system had determined our innocence in the third trial, and the NTB was also corrected by the Control Yuan. The false taxation bill will abided by the judgment and taken the initiative to revoke the wrong tax bill. However, the result was beyond everyone's expectation. Instead of revoking the illegal tax bill, the NTB continued to use the indictment that had been abandoned by the concurred to taxes. Theoretically, the indictment cannot be quoted as evidence for taxation, as it is only a guess from a prosecutor. But the NTB not only quoted it, but what's even worse is to accept the wrong evidence without any investigation. One example is that the amount in my Shifu's bank account was only 610,000 NTD at that moment, but was fabricated by the prosecutor Hou to be 3.2 billion NTD. It's a very ridiculous number, and the NTB just accepted it. Besides, the NTB takes us as a cram school, even though the Ministry of Education has confirmed that Taijiman is not a cram school. Even the administrative court representing the judiciary said so, and even in a document of the NTB itself has also indicated that Taijiman is not a cram school. So it is unbelievable that this ridiculous robbery happened in the so-called democratic country, Taiwan. My Shifu and my Shimu, his wife, were restricted from leaving the country 4 times for a total of 2,687 days due to this false case made by the prosecutor Hou. In 2007, the Supreme Court ruled that Taijiman was guilt-free and tax-free, like what I mentioned. But you know what? In 2010, the NTB had once again restricted my Shifu from leaving the country. This act shows that the government completely ignores the 2 international human rights declarations that emphasizes free rights. And last year, Taiwan's Administrative Enforcement Agency illegally auctioned my Shifu's land that were purchased for practicing Qigong. For me, it felt as if my home was robbed overnight and I could not call police for help because the crime is committed by my country. And facing this unlawful act, we were so furious.
But despite our anger, my Shifu reminds us to express our appealing with peace and rationality. I don't know how you feel when you hear these words, but when I think of a person who has been law-abiding throughout his life and try to make more people happy every day, and his country treated him in this way, treated him in return in this way for 25 years, I'm completely filled with anger. However, the person, my Shifu, that was falsely accused still told us to be peaceful and rational. So these two words were the most impressive lesson I've ever learned. I realized that in life, we must be upright in doing everything. We may not be able to do everything perfectly and smoothly, but we have to insist on being upright, for it is a lifetime purpose and not a way for earning. Plenty of times in this past 25 years that my master, my Shifu, can compromise with the NTB and negotiate for the amount to pay, but my Shifu has never considered that. Instead, he tried to guide us to learn what is right through witnessing more victims of tax and human rights, and turned around telling us to help them and fight together. So I share this lesson with you today because in the process of pursuing respect for freedom of religion and belief, I saw the value of the belief. I saw why it's so important. We have to protect it. The words peace and rationality from my Shifu represents the persistence of justice, and no matter how much grievances and hardships we face, we still choose to fight for human rights in the right path. Although the way of self-cultivation varies in different eras, religion human rights protection is always a critical issue, but we are fearless in challenges because I know conscience is always by our side. And I hope more people will awaken their conscience, show courage, and unite together so that we can become partners and insist on doing the right things together. And therefore,
Fortunately, there are technical problems, I think, with the audio.
Matter where we are in the world, a democracy with the rule of law that the people can be proud of. Thank you for your attention today.
Thank you, Mr. Chung Chen, for sharing your take and your personal feelings with passion and emotion. I always I was out of. Can you hear me now? Yeah, I'm sorry. So I was just thanking Mr. Chung Chen for his take and his personal feelings, which he expressed so deeply and emotionally, and adding that I always find outrageous when signs and symbols of devotion and deep respect are ideologically turned into proofs of crimes, as the case, for example, of Taijimen's red envelopes shows. We now go to our final speakers for this Taiwan segment of personal testimonies, which is so important, with Ms. Jacqueline Chang, last but not the least. She is a graduate student in the Department of Political Science, and she's also a volunteer at the Tax and Legal Reform League. Ms. Jacqueline Chang, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Distinguished guests, good evening. I'm a graduate student in the Department of Political Science and a volunteer in the Tax and Legal Reform League. Since I was a college student, tax and legal reform and transitional justice have always been topics of concern to me. Transitional justice has now become a human rights indicator and an important issue for countries around the world. Just like the German Nazi concentration camps, the South African genocide, and the Guangzhou incident in South Korea, Taiwan has also gone through the February 28 incident, martial law, and white terror. With countless sacrifice and struggles from democratic predecessors, Taiwan finally became a democratic and free country. President Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan lists transitional justice as one of her key political views during her election in 2016. Later, the legislative yuan passed many bills and established agencies to fully carry out transitional justice work. However, Taiwan's transitional justice has a big problem because our Act on Promoting Transitional Justice actually stipulated that only persecution cases that occurred from 1945 to 1992 should be handled. But we all know that it is impossible for a country to become democratic, free, and human rights guarding not overnight. Taiwan has also experienced a lot of human rights persecution after 1992. For example, in 1996, Taiwan's government initiated a wave of religious anti-criminal campaigns. Many civil organizations were innocently victimized as a result of political rectification, and Taijimen was the biggest victim. Many of the tax victims supported by the Tax and Legal Reform League are almost persecuted by the improper legal tax system after 1992. For example, Professor Zheng Jianyuan was taxed and robbed by the National Taxation Bureau when his house caught fire, and lawyer Huang Wenhuang was enthusiastic about doing charities. But he was taxed innocently and heavily. In the face of this bloody persecution, are we supposed to turn a blind eye just because this event didn't happen during the stipulated period of Act on Promoting Transitional Justice? Moreover, Taiwan's legal tax system has not really been lived from martial law. The tax officials have too much discretion. Tax bills can be issued without evidence. Legislation and rules can even be set up by them. In addition, the judicial remedy system has almost failed. Taiwanese have only a 6% winning rate in tax litigation. It is almost the same as in the authoritarian period. Therefore, all walks of life in Taiwan urgently call for legal and tax reforms. So far, more than 96% of all village chiefs in Taiwan have joined endorsed the protection of taxation human rights. However, to this day, a small number of illegal officials continue to cause countless persecution of false cases, which is definitely a great irony compared with President Tsai's comprehensive promotion of transitional justice. As a volunteer of the Tax and Legal Reform League, the Taijimen case has always been a human rights persecution that we are very concerned about. Last year, when we learned that the Taiwan government was going to illegally auction Taijimen's land, I followed many experts, scholars, Taijimen deeds, and other citizens to express our anger and dissatisfaction on the streets. My classmates spent their summer vacation going out to eat, drink, and have fun. During my summer vacation, I went to the Administrative Enforcement Agency and the Ministry of Finance to protest every day. To be honest, I was so tired that I wanted to cry every day. We had to enjoy the wind, the sun, and the rain, but none of us gave up because we still expect Taiwan's democracy and the rule of law to solve the problem. We still believe that government officials have a little conscience and are willing to solve people's suffering. However, so many of us have shouted our demands for nearly 2 months, while the officials regarded us as the ear and turned a blind eye. None of them were willing to come out to communicate with the people, and they eventually arbitrarily auctioned off Taijimen's land illegally. I will never forget the auction day. Officials of the Administrative Enforcement Agency immediately fled the scene after announcing that the auction was completed in accordance with the law. They dare not face the angry crowd at all, not to mention any kind of dialogue or response. Afterwards, they even issued news asking people to be rational, abide by the rule of law, and not to interfere with the execution of official duties. I would like to ask, who is it that undermines the rule of law? As early as 2007, Taijimen was declared not guilty and tax-free in the third instance of the Supreme Court, and even received compensation from the government. The state also certified the case as a significant human rights violations case. After 25 years, there is still no way to reject a case that was recognized innocent by the government and the 5 years. Not to mention that the officials who violated the law and abused power in this case were not punished. The officials protected and covered for each other and even got promoted all the way, ignoring the infringed human rights and even violating the human rights values that President Tsai has pursued since she took office. Isn't this the biggest joke as a democratic country? I happen to be 25 years this year. I happen to be 25 years old this year, meaning that how old I am is how long the persecution has lasted. Many people have since passed away before justice came. Finally, I would like to tell a story about the German prosecutor Fritz Bauer. Germany has experienced the Nazi Holocaust, so it attaches great importance to transitional justice. But in the beginning, the whole country, especially the National Public Service System, tried to cover up and forget the history of persecution. At that time, only Fritz Bauer, regardless of everyone's opposition, fought against the entire country alone, trying to dig out the historical truth and blame the perpetrators, only to pursue transitional justice. His story was made into an amazing movie called Labyrinth of Life, in which there was a sentence that is still engraved in my heart. We can't create a paradise on this land, but we can prevent this land from being a hell. Today, I want to send this sentence to President Tsai and all Taiwanese politicians. Listen to your conscience. Don't be kidnapped by a few illegal officials. As long as it is good for the people of Taiwan, you should do it bravely and save people from suffering. What's more, former legislator Xu Tiantai once stated, it only requires a very small amount of wisdom and courage to resolve Taijimen case. This case is the key of testing whether the Thai government's transitional justice is a success or not. Taiwan has always been regarded as a country of democracy, rule of law, and human rights in Asia. Last year, the National Human Rights Commission was established to align Taiwan's human rights with international standards. Therefore, I still believe that the Taiwan government is capable of solving the problem. The key lies in whether or not the government officials are willing to show their conscience. Not just Taiwan, many countries in the world have suffered serious human rights violations. Every one of us is a world citizen. I hope that everyone can uphold their conscience, respect human rights, help each other, be united and tolerant, so that the world will move towards peace and everyone will be happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jacqueline Chang. As we conclude this segment of our important webinar today, I do thank you all. And let me just underline once more that the Taijimen case is not about money at all, but about religious liberty. Taijimen could easily settle the case years ago if it were for money, and save a lot that instead the movement spent in defending the fundamental human right to religious liberty. With this, I handle the floor to Professor Introvigne for guiding the last part of the webinar with questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe before opening the floor to questions and answer, I would like to reflect with you on the notion of conscience and the International Day of Conscience. It came to me that the word conscience is connected with something very important for many religions, and that is conscientious objection. Conscientious objection is normally or originally understood as the refusal to participate in wars, in military, or to bear arms. And conscientious objection is deeply connected with religion, and particularly with three religious groups. The first, that in the United Kingdom from the 17th century asked not to participate in the military, were the Mennonites. And they want the right not to participate in the military, but they had to pay extra taxes. So it was a beginning, but it was not a full recognition of the principle of conscientious objection. Then in the next century, the Quakers took, so to speak, the relay, and in the United Kingdom, as well as in the United States, the Quakers asked not to participate in the military for religious reasons, and they had a mixed record of managing to achieve this or not. And then the third important group fighting for conscientious objection have been the Jehovah's Witnesses. And the fight extends to this very day. In a way, they are still fighting in South Korea, even if they have obtained some favorable decisions from local courts. Interestingly, the Jehovah's Witnesses had problems in Taiwan as well, and were instrumental in obtaining in the year 2000 that Taiwan became the first Asian nation to recognize conscientious objection and to offer alternative services. Normally, the Jehovah's Witnesses in Taiwan serve like as firefighters in the fire brigade rather than in any military capacity. The United Nations have recognized conscientious objection as a right, mostly in documents that they passed in the 1990s. And meanwhile, scholars, legal scholars and human rights scholars have worked on the notion of conscientious objection, which is in fact broader than not serving in the military. For instance, some Christians have asked to be able to be conscientious objectors if they are doctors and nurses and not perform abortions. But Jehovah's Witnesses also conscientiously object to singing the national anthem or salute the flag. So it's a broader notion, but what is interesting for us today is that by recognizing conscientious objection, and it's still not a done deal in all countries in the world, the countries and courts of law and the United Nations have recognized the importance of conscience and the fact that the value of conscience should be affirmed even in front of the power of the state, of the power of the government. So we saw this conflict in the very moving and very important first video, when we see an old, not an old, I'm older than she, so we saw a middle-aged lady taken away by the Taiwanese police just because a bureaucrat told the police the lady should be punished because the sign she was holding was criticizing a certain bureaucrat, and she, the bureaucrat, not the lady, took it very personally. But here again is a matter of conscience. This lady had the right to object to the actions of the police, and she had the right to protest, even in front of power we are taught to respect: the government, the police, the administration, because there is a sacred sanctuary in the conscience which allows us to protest and to resist when the power of the state is so obviously unjust. And again, I liked, I believe it was Susan Wong, who talked about the mafia and the Godfather's movie. Unfortunately for us in Italy, the mafia is not a movie. We have so many police officers and judges who were killed by the mafia, even very recently. And I believe here there is an application again of the principle of conscience. Because when Marco said that Dr. Hong refused to settle not for the money, basically refused to settle because of the primacy of conscience. He received this offer he could not refuse in theory, according to the Corleone principle from the Godfather's movie, but he did refuse. And he did refuse because conscience was more important than the wallet. And the conscience even overcame the deep respect, particularly in Asian cultures and in Chinese culture, people have for the governments and for those in authority. So I believe all these stories basically a story of conscience. Having said so, we don't have a lot of time, but both here and privately, I received just a small number of questions I would like to raise. One, quite curiously, is for Willy Fautrey, even if he's the presenter or the chair, but well, there is nothing wrong in asking a question to the chair. And the question to Willy Fautrey is about the movie and the story of this Miss Wang. And somebody says the police was obviously aware there were people with cameras and reporters filming them. So why do you believe that the police, notwithstanding this in a democratic country, went on and being aware they were being captured on camera, still did what they do and arrested a peaceful woman? How could this happen? It seems to be against the best interest of the police itself. Willy.
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. First, I would like to say that what happened to Mrs. Wang is really an egregious violation over human rights, over freedom of expression, over freedom of thought, of freedom of expression, and freedom to protest publicly and peacefully. And I think the attitude of the police in this matter is very disturbing, because it gives the impression that even if the media are present, whether they are Taiwanese or maybe also foreign press correspondents, they feel that they are above the law. That's really my impression, that they don't care about the media because they have the feeling that they cannot be reached by the justice system, and they have a sufficient protection above, at a higher level, and that they will not be prosecuted and sanctioned in one way or another. And I found that very disturbing, I must say, that sort of culture, mentality among those public servants.
Thank you, Willie. Is Eric Roux still here? Eric Roux?
I'm still here, Massimo.
Yeah, there is a question somebody said for you, and it is, I believe it's a question which has been raised in some of our past webinars, but it's still an important question. In Taiwan, after all, there are many religious and spiritual movements, as there are many in Europe. Why do you believe that some of them are singled out and persecuted more strongly than others? Because it's a fact that some people would attack all new religious movements, but some are, so to speak, more attacked than the others.
Well, are you speaking just for Taiwan or for all over the world? In general?
It's unclear, but I believe they say just as it happens also in Europe. So the same problem is in Europe and in Taiwan. And
okay.
So the question is about why among 100 movements, some are singled out and persecuted more strongly than others.
I believe, first of all, that there was an answer in my speech, which is the number and the growing. So, I mean, a small group will not be a target because the people who are defending their own vested interests are not in fear of a small group without influence. So that would be a factor, you know. And obviously, also, you have people who are, it depends on which vested interest is behind. Because, of course, you know what we call a cult is different from countries to countries. I can give an example. In Greece, in the late 90s, we discovered, I mean, from a leak, you know, in the newspaper, a Secret Service report, which was defining the most dangerous cults of Greece. And the most dangerous cults of Greece for the secret services were Protestant and Catholics, which of course, if you do some kilometers and go to Italy, it will not be the same, or, you know, but in Greece, it was them because they were considered as a threat for the Orthodox Church, which had very much privileges there. So depending on who is trying to protect his own privileges, you will choose the one that you will target from this. That's an answer very general. And of course, if you look at every country separately, you can go to various more specific reasons for why this movement is attacked or not. Sometimes it's just because the fanatic I was discussing about in my speech has some reason to go after one movement and does not care about the others. Yeah.
Well, my personal contribution, if I can, to this answer is sometimes one factor in some countries, I'm not saying in all countries, may also be to go against valuable properties. For instance, if you look at the Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, I'm still persuaded, and some other scholars are persuaded, that some interests in St. Petersburg were very much interested in their valuable real estate property there, which was quickly seized and immediately sold to some people connected with the government. So that may be a factor in Taiwan, that some good property were intended by Taiji men for use to build a spiritual cultivation center, and perhaps somebody believed it was a good property to be seized and auctioned, and of course some will gain bonuses out of it. But that's just, of course, one factor. It will be too simple if it was the only factor, and certainly it's not. I believe I would forward one last question, which is a nice question for Susan Wong. Is she still there? Susan?
Yes, I'm here.
And that's somebody who says he or she has read your papers on music. You are a musicologist and you have a PhD in musicology. And so I believe it's a nice, gentle way of concluding our webinar. It says, in your experience as a music teacher, have you been helped by your experience as a Taiji man dizzy? And does music also have something to do with conscience?
Yes, I mean, to me as an artist and a music educator and also a musician, I think my conscience is everywhere, and especially I like the medium of music. So then whenever I teach or I perform, I compose as well. That is part of who I am. Then I use the media to express what my belief is. And the conscience is especially very important nowadays, because I believe that's the best form of ourselves, you know, the purest part of our heart. And I believe that no matter where you are and what your profession is, it's always that we can exercise our conscience and then let it be shine and then guide us towards the right path so that we can all benefit from that. So no matter, you know, a musician, a musicologist, or whatever the expertise that you have, I encourage everybody to look into ourselves and then see if we can find the best part of ourselves, and then always reflect upon what can we do to make this world better, because we are all independent and we need everybody to work together to really to look deep in the conscience and for the better good, because no one can live well without anybody else not living well. So that will be my my contribution for today. Thank you.
So thank you, Susan. And I believe that's a note of optimism we all need. We all need in face of injustice, and unfortunately we had to discuss the injustices vested on the Taiji men in the Taiwan case, and also in time of global crisis and sadness. Taiwan did quite well with the confronting the COVID, but we are not doing so well in countries like Italy or France or Belgium, where people are still dying and we don't see the end of the tunnel. But I believe that one of the lessons we are learning from the experience of Taijimen is that by looking into ourselves, looking into conscience, finding this compass, this internal compass, which is the conscience, we can find incredible strength to survive in times of crisis. And that may be for us the COVID crisis, and for the Taijimen Dizi, may be the crisis of this injustice, which is not going away, despite, as the last Dizi speaker said, despite the fact that so many young people spend their holidays protesting rather than having fun, and despite the fact that now a significant number of scholars and human rights activists from all over the world are supporting Taijimen, but despite all this, the injustice is still going on. But that's, as the book Who Stole Their Youth said, is not a reason to despair, but it's a reason to hang even more firmly on our conscience and do what is right, avoid what is wrong, fight injustice with conscience, and also fight injustice with beauty, music, as Susan say, and a smile. And with these talks, I will thank all those who patiently listened to our webinar, and will give the floor to Willy Fautrey for just the final greeting.
I just want hereby to thank all the panelists, Dizis and others, for their contribution to the debate, and to have highlighted from many different angles all the facets of the ordeal that Taijimen has been going through, and their people have been going through in the last 25 years. This is a good fight, because this is the fight for justice. This is the fight for social justice. And I am sure that the values of Taijimen will now resonate throughout the whole society of Taiwan, but also beyond the society of Taiwan, because now through those webinars, Taijimen, that was absolutely unknown, I would say, outside Taiwan a year ago, has attracted a lot of attention and has raised a number of fundamental human rights issues and conscience issues that will certainly not disappear from the records of those who have expressed their opinions and their feelings about what's happening to them. And I'm sure that the voices of the disease and others will be heard where they need to be heard, hopefully in Washington, hopefully in Brussels, hopefully in other big capitals of Europe, and that sort of awareness will not remain unnoticed in Taiwan, and may have some influence, some impact on their appreciation of what has happened to the Taijimen movement in the last 25 years. Thank you very much. Thank you, and goodbye, and see you next time, when there is such another day to celebrate and to give visibility to the issue of Taijimen in Taiwan. And thank you for all the speakers and the disease. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.